It's time for the big news. The big news. There is a new Cannonball record. It is one of the most important and significant records, Cannonball records, of all time.
So does that mean it's a new overall?
Yes, it is an overall record. Fastest time across the country. Solo driver, one person.
Okay.
51 days.
Okay. Not the unit of measure I was expecting.
Right? He did it in a 1902 California machine, which is a motorized bicycle.
What? Now, today?
Right. No, 1903. Over the past year, a number of us have been researching transcontinental record history, known more as Cannonball, right? A lot of people think that Irwin, quote-unquote, Cannonball Baker was the first person to cross the country, set a Cannonball record, and that's why we call it Cannonball. That is why we call it Cannonball, but he was not the first, nor were his first runs the fastest. There was a number of records set prior to him. Up until now, we believe that there was two records set in 1903. The first one was 64 days, and the second one was 62 days, both in automobiles, one of them with a dog, which was kind of cool. We have learned in the last week, thanks to research by Jay Roberts, our Gonzo Prius Cannonballer guy, that, whoops, I forgot the guy's name.
George A. Wyman.
Thank you,
yes. Well, that's Gonzo Prius is actually watching on Instagram.
George Wyman set a record 20 days before the previously known as the first transcontinental crossing on this 1902 California machine motorized bicycle. And he did it 13 days faster than a team in a car, and he was on this motorized bicycle.
That's kind of crazy.
51 days
on
in
a
1903.
bicycle.
That's fantastic.
Yes. According to Jay, one of the teams in the car, they all happened within like a couple months of each other. I guess when it takes a couple months to do the run and there's only 6 months of not winter in a year, then they all kind of overlap. But according to Jay, one of the teams in an automobile started before George Wyman, and George passed them on his little motorized bicycle along the way.
Amazing.
These early Cannonball records are so cool because it's about pioneering. It's about the American spirit, the American dream. It's about the advent of this type of technology. This stuff happened before there was roads, let alone interstate highways. They were, horse trails and just rutted out. There was washed out bridges. I mean, it was primitive as primitive gets.
Well, it's like I'm trying to think. Like this was probably 51. You said 51 days, right?
51 days.
Riding a motorized bike on a dirt road, which sounds awful.
Miserable.
Right.
Probably the same way the automobile did, but it's like, how did he route and by himself? And that 51 days is a long time, but I cannot imagine doing that in the wilds of the U.S. at that point.
Right.
There's no highway, like you said, no highways.
So now I have this compelling desire to buy a 1902 California machine. I mean, it's cool to have the timeline. This guy did it first. We did it last.
You should totally take the record of a California machine Cannonball away from this dead guy.
Can you imagine Doug? We could give him like a leather cap and like goggles. And just
like one of the ascots or scarves or whatever.
It's actually been a discussion we've had. I hold that the old Cannonball records are far more interesting and a bigger accomplishment than the new ones. Ours are highly illegal, so like that's the biggest thing now. It's just like all the technology required to not get arrested for speeding. Other than that, it's like, well, we're in German super sedans that are made for the Autobahn. They have massage seats and air conditioning, and like it's a walk in the park. It's a big nothing burger. But these guys like Irwin Cannonball Baker doing it in 53 and a half hours in 1934. Okay, they had the Lincoln Highway, so at least it was paved pretty much all the way across the country. But 53 and a half hours.
Yeah, we went to, I forget, gosh, I cannot remember the name of the auto museum we went to on the East Coast, would be a couple years ago now.
Simeon.
Yeah, we went there and they had one of the cars that he used, and looking at that and looking at like essentially the wooden folding chair that was the seat.
Stutz Bearcat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
totally
I cannot
open
imagine.
Car, no top, wooden wheels. That is not a comfortable ride.
No, and like there's no storage, like you can't take anything with you. And again, even at that point, you run into like, where do you stop? How do you know what you're going to run into? How do you make sure you have food? Like,
well, the interesting thing about the early transcontinental runs is because they were highly competitive, but they were also had the endorsement of car manufacturers. So these car manufacturers would hire Irwin Baker and others to do these runs for them because they were trying to prove the reliability of their product. The auto manufacturers would want as much publicity as possible, and of course the drivers would as well. So there would be tons and tons of news. So it was like the modern day gumball rallies. Like at the start and the finish, there was giant crowds of people and reporters and stuff, and they would have escorts into cities across their destination with reporters there and find meals prepared for them at hotels and stuff. So it's interesting that modern day super luxe rallies that we as cannonballers kind of make fun of for just being like bougie, parties with drives in between is kind of actually hearkening back to the early transcontinental drives across country. Irwin Baker didn't stop at hotels and stay the night. He kept going, reading about these things. There was so much press surrounding these runs. So they had everything they needed because they had support. Now when you do it, nobody wants anything to do with press. Nobody wants to sponsor it. Nobody wants to be associated with it because of the illegality of it or the potential liability if something, God forbid, goes wrong. It's interesting to see how it's changed and transformed over the years, but it's very, very interesting to research and find out about these early transcontinental records. It's really a really neat part of automotive history. Something that we as modern cannonballers were thinking about doing is recreating some of the early runs or routes. Like, let's drive the Lincoln Highway across country. Now it's all traffic lights and stuff, but let's take a car from that era and drive the non-highway routes and see if it's possible with all of today's infrastructure to do it faster than they did way back then.
So you're going to take a Stutz Bearcat on what is now the Lincoln Highway? You and Ed Bolian just side by side. Or Arnie is more appropriate. What am I talking about? I just want the leather caps and the big old goggles.
If somebody would sponsor this, I would do it. I'm not going to go buy a Stutz Bearcat. I'm not going to go do all that crap. But if it's an idea I've had that I think it would be fun to try to recreate, because I honestly think those records were far more difficult and far more amazing than anything we do in the modern day.
But don't you think, like, no matter how you attempt to recreate or to make it authentic with whatever gear that you're actually using, you will never truly be able to, even if you take the most back roads as imaginable, right? You will still never fully experience what these guys were experiencing.
No, not at all. Not at all. You can't.
Which is the bummer of it,
But you could at least say, okay, we have different challenges now in terms of traffic and intersections and stoplights and urban sprawl and everything. They had ruts and animals that might try to kill them and
polio,
polio and food starvation.
Something else, yeah.
It would be cool to try to recreate that in some way. If anyone would like to loan me and Artie a 1934 Graham Page Model 57, we'll see if we can do it in less than 53 and a half hours, not using any interstate highways.